Chapter 1. The Reluctant Holiday Traveler. Carl Braxton stared at the blinking cursor on his laptop screen like it had personally offended him. The email he was drafting to his boss was simple enough. Happy holidays, see you next year. But his mind kept wandering to the phone call he'd had an hour ago. Carman. His younger sister had perfected the art of guilt-tripping, and today she'd wielded it like a seasoned gladiator. Come home for Christmas, she'd said, her voice sweet enough to rot teeth. Mom's already planning dinner. Dad's dead. But it'll be fun. Like old times. Old times? Carl snorted at the memory. Old times were awkward dinners where his parents communicated through him like he was a human carrier pigeon. Tell your father the turkey's dry. Tell your mother she should have let me carve it. Fun wasn't the word he'd use. He closed the laptop with a sigh and leaned back in his chair. 27 years old, single, and happy. Or at least content. He liked his life. He liked his quiet apartment, his predictable routines, and the fact that no one expected him to share his fries. Going home meant chaos, and chaos wasn't on his holiday wish list. His phone buzzed again. Carman. Of course. He answered with a resigned, "Yes, dear sister?" "Don't dear sister me," she shot back. "Have you packed yet?" Carl glanced at the empty suitcase in the corner. Define packed. Carl. Her tone dropped into that dangerous register that meant she was about to lecture him. "You promised. I said I'd think about it. You said," and I quote, "Fine, Carman, I'll come home." Did I? He rubbed his temple. That sounds like something I'd say under duress. Duress? I asked nicely. You threatened to tell Mom I voted for takeout over her cooking. That's not a threat. That's a promise. Carl chuckled despite himself. Carman had always been good at this, pulling him back into the family orbit no matter how far he drifted. Fine, he said. I'll pack. But if Dad starts another lecture about how divorce was the best thing that ever happened to him, I'm leaving. Deal, she said brightly. See you tomorrow. The call ended, and Carl stared at his phone like it had betrayed him. Tomorrow. Great. He dragged the suitcase onto the bed and started tossing in clothes. Jeans, sweaters, socks, nothing festive. He wasn't about to wear a reindeer sweater just to make his mother happy. As he packed, his thoughts wandered. Christmas at home meant navigating two households like a diplomatic envoy. His parents hadn't spoken since the ink dried on their divorce papers when he was 14. They lived on opposite sides of town, each pretending the other didn't exist. Carl had learned early to keep the peace by splitting his time evenly, like a kid in a custody battle that never ended. He zipped the suitcase and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the city lights outside his window. He liked his life here. No drama, no expectations. Just him and his freedom. People always asked why he wasn't married yet, as if happiness required a +1. Carl didn't mind relationships. He'd had a few, but marriage? That was a gamble he wasn't willing to take. Not in a world where the house always seemed to win. His phone buzzed again. A text from Carman. Mom's making your favorite pie. Don't be late. Carl smiled despite himself. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad. A few days of family chaos, some pie, and then back to his quiet life. He could survive that. Probably. Chapter 2, Homecoming and Awkward Family Dynamics. The drive back to his hometown was like stepping into a time capsule Carl never asked for. The same billboards lined the highway, promising miracle diets and car deals that sounded too good to be true. The same diner sign flickered at the edge of town, like it had been fighting for its life since 1998. Carl gripped the steering wheel and muttered, "Welcome back to Nostalgiaville." His GPS chirped, "Turn left in 500 feet." He didn't need directions. He could navigate this town blindfolded. Every street held a memory, some good, some awkward, and some involving braces and a bad haircut he'd rather forget. He pulled into his mother's driveway just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The house looked exactly the same. White siding, blue shutters, and a wreath on the door that had seen better Decembers. Carl killed the engine and sat for a moment, bracing himself. His mom was sweet, but she had a talent for turning casual visits into emotional marathons. The front door flew open before he even reached the porch. Carl. His mother, Linda, barreled toward him like a linebacker in a Christmas sweater. She wrapped him in a hug that smelled like cinnamon and nostalgia. "Hey, Mom," he said, patting her back like she was a friendly golden retriever. "Good to see you." "You're too thin," she declared, pulling back to inspect him like a car she was thinking of buying. "Are you eating? You look pale." "I'm fine," Carl said, smiling. "City life agrees with me." "City life doesn't feed you," she muttered, ushering him inside. "Come on, dinner's almost ready." The house was warm and cozy, filled with the scent of roasted turkey and something sweet baking in the oven. Carl dropped his suitcase by the stairs and followed her into the kitchen, where Carman was perched on a stool, scrolling through her phone. "Look who finally showed up," Carman said without looking up. "I was starting to think you'd bail." "Nice to see you too," Carl said, ruffling her hair as he passed. She swatted his hand away like a cat. "Don't mess up the hair," she warned. "I have plans tonight." "Plans?" Carl raised an eyebrow. "What kind of plans?" The kind that involve not sitting here listening to Mom talk about her new book club, Carman said, smirking. I've got a date. Carl blinked. A date? On Christmas Eve. It's not Christmas Eve yet, she said, rolling her eyes. And yes, a date. Some of us are still trying to find love. Carl chuckled. Good luck with that. Don't start, Carman warned, pointing a manicured finger at him. Just because you've sworn off marriage doesn't mean the rest of us have. I haven't sworn off marriage, Carl said, grabbing a dinner roll from the counter. I've just politely declined the invitation. Aha, Carman said, smirking. Keep telling yourself that. Before Carl could respond, his mom swooped in with a tray of appetizers. No fighting, she said, setting it down. It's Christmas. It's not Christmas yet, Carl muttered, earning a glare from both women. Dinner was a whirlwind of conversation, most of it led by Linda, who had apparently joined a book club, started yoga, and was considering adopting a cat. Carl nodded and smiled in all the right places, but his mind wandered. He thought about his dad, how he'd have to make the same trip across town tomorrow, endure the same questions, and pretend everything was fine. After dessert, Carl escaped to the porch for some fresh air. The night was crisp, the stars bright against the dark sky. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts, landing on a name he hadn't thought about in years. Jake, high school buddy, king of bad jokes, and probably still living in town. On impulse, Carl sent a text. Hey, you around? The reply came fast. Carl Braxton? The legend? Friday night poker. My place. You in? Carl grinned. Maybe this trip wouldn't be so bad after all. Chapter 3. Reunion sparks. Carl woke up the next morning to the smell of coffee and Carman humming off-key in the kitchen. He dragged himself out of bed, threw on a hoodie, and wandered downstairs, where his sister was perched at the counter like a queen surveying her kingdom. Morning sunshine, she said, scrolling through her phone. Sleep okay? Like a rock, Carl muttered, pouring himself a mug of coffee. A rock that got hit by a train. Carman smirked. You're just grumpy because you're not used to Mom's bedtime stories. She gave me a TED talk on the benefits of yoga, Carl said, taking a sip. I think I learned more about downward dog than I ever wanted to. Before Carman could reply, his phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Jake. Poker night confirmed. 7 p.m. My place. Bring your A game. Carl grinned. Looks like I've got plans tonight. Plans? Carman raised an eyebrow. What kind of plans? The kind that involve cards, beer, and bad jokes, Carl said. Jake's hosting poker night. Oh wow, Carman said, feigning shock. The high school crew rides again. What's next? A reunion at the roller rink. Don't tempt me, Carl said, smirking. I still have my skates. Carman laughed, and for a moment it felt like old times, before life got complicated, before divorce split their holidays in two. Carl finished his coffee and headed out to run errands, partly to escape his sister's teasing and partly to clear his head. By 7 o'clock, Carl was pulling into Jake's driveway, which looked exactly like it had in high school, minus the rusted basketball hoop. The porch light flickered as he climbed the steps, and before he could knock, the door swung open. Braxton, Jake boomed, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. Get in here, man. Carl stepped inside and was immediately hit by a wave of nostalgia and the smell of pizza. The living room was packed with familiar faces. Ryan, Marcus, and a few others he hadn't seen in years. They looked older, sure, but the energy was the same, loud, chaotic, and full of laughter. Look who finally decided to grace us with his presence, Ryan said, clapping Carl on the back. City boy returns. Don't start, Carl said, grinning. I've been here 5 minutes and already feel like I'm back in homeroom. Grab a beer, Jake said, tossing him a cold one. We're about to deal. Carl settled into a chair at the poker table, the cards worn and familiar. As the game started, the conversation flowed. High school memories, old crushes, and the usual ribbing about who peaked at 17. Carl laughed until his cheeks hurt, but as the night wore on, the jokes gave way to something deeper. So, Marcus said, shuffling the deck. Anyone here actually happy with their love life? The room went quiet. Ryan snorted. Define happy. Define love life, Jake added, earning a round of chuckles. Carl leaned back, listening as the stories spilled out. Failed relationships, messy breakups, and dates that felt more like job interviews. The common thread? Disappointment. Too many expectations, not enough connection. It's like women today treat guys like disposable ATMs, Ryan said, shaking his head. Swipe, spend, discard. Harsh, Marcus said, though he didn't disagree. But, yeah. Carl didn't say much. He just listened, feeling a strange mix of validation and sadness. It wasn't just him. Everyone here had the same scars, the same doubts. Maybe he wasn't crazy for wanting to stay single. Maybe he was just realistic. Jake dealt another hand, grinning. Well, at least we've got poker. No prenup required. The table erupted in laughter, and Carl smiled, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought about Carman, about her optimism, about the date she'd mentioned. He thought about the woman he'd seen yesterday, the one who'd smiled at him like she remembered something he didn't. For the first time in a long time, Carl wondered if maybe, just maybe, he was missing something. Chapter 4. Poker Night Confessions. The cards slapped against the table in a rhythm that felt almost comforting. Carl watched Jake deal with the same flourish he'd had in high school, like shuffling cards was a performance art. Empty beer bottles lined the edge of the table, and the pizza box sat open, its contents reduced to crusts and regret. "All right, gentlemen," Jake said, grinning. "Let's make this interesting. $5 buy-in. Winner takes bragging rights." "Bragging rights," Ryan snorted. "I need more than that to justify losing my dignity." "You lost that in 2008, Marcus said dryly, earning a round of laughter. Carl chuckled, tossing his chips into the pot. "Let's just play before Ryan starts crying." The first few hands were easy, banter, jokes, and the occasional groan when someone folded too soon. But as the night wore on, the conversation shifted. It started with Ryan mentioning his divorce, then Marcus chiming in about his last breakup, and before long, the table turned into a therapy session with cards. "I swear," Ryan said, leaning back in his chair, "dating today is like applying for a job you don't even want. They want your resume, your references, and your credit score. Don't forget the personality test," Jake added. "If you fail, they ghost you." Carl smirked. "Sounds efficient." "Efficient?" Ryan shot him a look. "It's exhausting. And for what? Half the time, they're just looking for a guy with a decent paycheck." Marcus nodded slowly. "It's like we're disposable. If you're not meeting every expectation, you're out." The room fell quiet for a moment, the weight of shared frustration settling in. Carl felt it too, the sense that something had shifted, that relationships weren't what they used to be. He wasn't bitter, just cautious. Jake broke the silence with a question that hung in the air like smoke. "All right, real talk. How many people do you know in a successful marriage?" Ryan frowned. "Define successful." "Making it to retirement age," Jake said. "Still together, still happy. Not just tolerating each other because splitting assets is a nightmare." The guys exchanged glances. One by one, they shook their heads. "None," Ryan said finally. "Not one." Marcus raised a finger. "My grandparents. That's it." "Grandparents don't count," Jake said. "Different era. Different rules." Carl leaned back, staring at his cards. "So, out of 7 guys here, we've got one example, and it's from 50 years ago." "Pretty much," Marcus said. Carl let out a low whistle. "That's depressing." "Tell me about it," Ryan muttered. "Makes you wonder why we even try." Carl set his cards down and looked around the table. "You want to know why I'm not married? Why I'm not even thinking about it?" Jake smirked. "Because you're scared of commitment?" "No," Carl said, his voice steady. "I'm scared of the courts dismantling my life and handing my future ex-wife a prize for divorcing me." The table went silent. Carl continued, his tone calm but firm. "Think about it. Marriage today? It's a coin toss. 50% chance you make it. 50% chance you lose half your stuff, your kids, and your peace of mind. If someone told you to jump out of an airplane with a parachute that only works half the time, would you do it?" Ryan blinked. "Hell no." "Exactly," Carl said. "So why gamble your life on someone else's feelings?" "Feelings change. Laws don't." Marcus whistled softly. "That's dark, but not wrong." Jake chuckled, shaking his head. "Leave it to Carl to turn poker night into a TED Talk." Carl grinned. "Hey, you asked." The laughter returned, but it was tinged with something heavier, an unspoken agreement that Carl wasn't entirely wrong. They played a few more hands, the conversation drifting back to lighter topics, but the question lingered in the back of everyone's mind. As Carl gathered his winnings, just enough for a gas station coffee, he felt a strange mix of satisfaction and unease. He wasn't bitter. He wasn't lonely. He was practical. And yet, as he stepped out into the cold night air, he couldn't shake the image of that parachute, fluttering in the wind. Chapter 5. The big question. The night air was sharp enough to make Carl's breath fog as he walked to his car. He could still hear the laughter from Jake's house echoing faintly behind him, but the mood had shifted before they wrapped up. That question, "How many people do you know in a successful marriage?" was still rattling around in his head like loose change. He slid into the driver's seat and sat for a moment, staring at the steering wheel. One example. Out of 7 guys, only Marcus had an answer, and even that was his grandparents. Carl wasn't surprised, but hearing it out loud made something tighten in his chest. He started the engine and drove through quiet streets, past houses glowing with Christmas lights. Families inside, laughing, sharing traditions. Carl wondered how many of those smiles were real and how many were just for show. The next day, Carl met up with the guys again at a local diner. It was one of those places that hadn't changed in decades. Red vinyl booths, a jukebox that probably hadn't worked since the Clinton administration, and a waitress who called everyone Han. Jake waved Carl over to a corner booth. "Braxton, grab a seat. We were just debating whether marriage is a scam or a social experiment gone wrong." Carl slid in, smirking. "Sounds like light breakfast conversation." Ryan stirred his coffee like it had personally offended him. "I've been thinking about that question from last night. Successful marriage. What does that even mean anymore?" Not killing each other before retirement, Marcus said, deadpan. Seriously, Ryan continued. My parents divorced. My sister divorced. Every friend I have? Divorced or miserable. It's like, nobody wins. Jake leaned back, grinning. Maybe the trick is not to play. Carl raised his mug in mock salute. Now you're speaking my language. Marcus frowned. But doesn't that feel, I don't know, sad? Like we're giving up? Carl shrugged. I don't see it as giving up. I see it as risk management. Ryan snorted. You and your analogies. Carl smiled faintly. Look, I'm not anti-love. I'm not even anti-commitment. But marriage? That's a legal contract with emotional fine print. And if it goes south, the courts don't care about feelings. They care about assets. Jake nodded. Preach. Carl leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. If someone told you to jump out of an airplane with a parachute that only works half the time, would you do it? Ryan groaned. Not this again. Answer the question, Carl said. No, Ryan admitted. Hell no. Exactly, Carl said. So why gamble your life on someone else's feelings? Feelings change. Laws don't. Marcus tapped his fingers on the table. But isn't love worth the risk? Carl hesitated. That was the question, wasn't it? He wanted to say no, to stick to his logic, but something in Marcus's tone made him pause. He thought about Carman, her optimism, her hope. He thought about that woman he'd seen at the store yesterday, the one who smiled like she knew him. He cleared his throat. Maybe, for some people. But for me, I'd rather keep my peace than roll the dice. The table fell quiet for a moment, the weight of his words settling in. Then Jake grinned and broke the tension. All right, enough philosophy. Who's paying the check? Laughter returned, but Carl's mind stayed elsewhere. He wasn't bitter. He wasn't lonely. He was practical. And yet, as he watched snow start to fall outside the diner window, he wondered if practicality was just another word for fear. Chapter 6. Enter the wild card. Carl wasn't planning on running errands. He wasn't planning on anything, really, just killing time before the next round of family obligations. But when his mom mentioned they were out of nutmeg and Carman begged for more wrapping paper, Carl found himself trudging through the aisles of the local grocery store like a man on a mission. The store was packed with holiday chaos, kids whining for candy canes, couples arguing over ham sizes, and a cashier wearing antlers that looked like they'd been through a war. Carl grabbed the nutmeg, tossed it into his basket, and headed toward the seasonal aisle. That's when he saw her. She was standing in front of a wall of gift wrap, holding two rolls like they were weapons in a duel. One was red with gold snowflakes, the other silver with tiny reindeer. Her brow furrowed in concentration, lips pursed in a way that made Carl forget how to breathe for a second. He knew that face, or at least he thought he did. Emily, the name slipped out before he could stop it. She turned, and for a moment, Carl felt like he'd been punched by nostalgia. Emily Carter, high school debate team, queen of witty comebacks, and the girl who once beat him in a mock trial so badly he considered switching schools. Her eyes widened, then softened into a smile. Carl Braxton. Wow, I thought you escaped this town for good. Carl grinned, trying to play it cool. I did, but apparently nutmeg and family guilt have a way of pulling you back. Emily laughed, a warm, easy sound that made the fluorescent lights seem less harsh. Sounds about right. So what's the verdict? Red or silver? Carl glanced at the rolls in her hands. Depends. Are you wrapping gifts for someone you like, or someone you're obligated to impress? Both, she said, tilting her head. Family and co-workers. Go with red, Carl said. Silver says, I tried. Red says, I care. Emily raised an eyebrow. And you're an expert on gift wrap psychology now? City life changes a man, Carl said solemnly, earning another laugh. They stood there for a moment, the hum of holiday chaos fading into the background. Carl felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. A spark. Not the kind that blinds you, but the kind that sneaks up quietly, like a warm ember in the cold. So, Emily said, tossing the silver roll back on the shelf. Are you here for the holidays? Yeah, Carl said. Visiting family. Trying not to get caught in the crossfire. Emily smiled knowingly. Divorced parents? Since I was 14, Carl said. You? Same, she said. Guess we're veterans. Carl chuckled. Survivors, more like. Emily glanced at her cart, then back at him. Well, if you're around Friday night, a bunch of us are meeting at O'Malley's for drinks. You should come. Carl hesitated for half a second, then nodded. Sounds good. Great, Emily said, her smile lingering just long enough to make Carl wonder if he imagined it. See you then. She walked away, leaving Carl standing in the aisle like a man who'd just been handed a plot twist. He stared at the nutmeg in his basket, then at the empty space where Emily had been, and for the first time in years he felt something shift. Maybe this trip wasn't just about family. Maybe it was about something else entirely. Chapter 7. Love, Lies, and Leftovers. Carl was halfway through a leftover turkey sandwich when the front door slammed open like a scene from a crime drama. Carman stormed in, heels clicking against the hardwood, her coat hanging off one shoulder like it had given up on life. Wow, Carl said, setting down his plate. Judging by the entrance, I'm guessing the date didn't end with a romantic carriage ride? Carman shot him a look that could curdle eggnog. Don't start. Carl leaned back in his chair, smirking. I'm not starting. I'm observing. You look like someone who just survived a hostage situation. She kicked off her heels and flopped onto the couch with a dramatic sigh. It was a disaster. Define disaster, Carl said, grabbing his drink. Because your definition and mine might differ. Carman sat up, eyes blazing. He brought his mother. Carl blinked. His mother? Yes. She threw her hands up. We were supposed to meet for drinks, and he shows up with his mom like it's a family reunion. Carl tried and failed not to laugh. Maybe he's just close to his family? Close? Carl, she ordered for him. She told me he likes his steak medium rare and that he's such a good boy. I thought I was on a date with both of them. Carl chuckled, shaking his head. Wow, that's impressive. Oh, it gets better, Carman said, leaning forward. She asked me if I wanted kids. On the first date. While he sat there smiling like a golden retriever. Carl whistled. That's bold. Bold? It's psychotic, Carman said, collapsing back against the cushions. I swear I'm done. Dating is a nightmare. Carl studied her for a moment, her frustration raw and real. He'd heard the same tone from his friends last night. The exhaustion, the disappointment. It wasn't just him. It was everyone. You're not done, Carl said gently. You're just tired. Carman groaned. I don't know, Carl. Maybe you're right. Maybe marriage is a coin toss. Maybe I should just adopt cats and call it a day. Carl smiled faintly. Cats are low maintenance. Don't tempt me, she muttered, then glanced at him. You really believe all that stuff you said last night? About marriage being a gamble? Carl hesitated. He wanted to say yes, to stick to his logic, but Emily's smile flashed in his mind like a neon sign. He cleared his throat. I believe it's risky, and I'm not big on risk. Carman studied him, her expression softening. You're not scared of risk. You're scared of getting hurt. Carl opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. Maybe she was right. Maybe practicality was just fear in a nice suit. Before he could respond, Carman smirked. You know, I saw you smiling at your phone earlier. Who was that? Carl raised an eyebrow. You spying on me now? Answer the question, she said, grinning. Carl sighed, leaning back. Emily Carter. Ran into her at the store. Carman's eyes lit up. Emily? As in debate team Emily? Wow. She was gorgeous. She still is, Carl admitted before he could stop himself. Carman grinned like a cat with cream. Well, well, well. Mr. Risk Management might be reconsidering his portfolio. Carl threw a pillow at her, laughing. Don't start. But as Carman cackled and Carl tried to look annoyed, he felt something shift inside him. A quiet, unsettling thought he couldn't shake. Maybe love wasn't about guarantees. Maybe it was about choosing the risk for the right person. Chapter 8. Second poker night and deeper bonds. Jake's living room looked like a scene from a holiday sitcom. Half-empty beer bottles, a pizza box that had given up on life, and 7 grown men arguing over who cheated last time. Carl stepped inside, shaking snow from his jacket, and was greeted by the familiar chaos. Braxton, Jake called from the kitchen, holding a six-pack like a trophy. You ready to lose again? Carl smirked. You mean ready to take your money? Always. Ryan groaned from the couch. Don't let him fool you. He's been practicing his poker face in the mirror. Carl grinned, sliding into his usual seat at the table. It's called confidence, Ryan. You should try it sometime. The cards were dealt, chips clinked, and the banter flowed like cheap beer. For a while, it was all jokes and nostalgia. Who had the worst haircut in high school, who got detention for something stupid, who still owed Jake $20 from 2009. But as the night wore on, the conversation drifted back to familiar territory. So, Marcus said, tossing in his chips, anyone here actually feeling optimistic about dating? Ryan snorted. Optimistic? I'd settle for not traumatized. Jake laughed. Come on, it's not that bad. Ryan shot him a look. You're single too, genius. By choice, Jake said, grinning. I like my freedom. Carl stayed quiet, shuffling his cards, but his mind wasn't on the game. It was on Emily, her laugh, her smile, the way she tilted her head when she asked about his plans. He'd been replaying that grocery store moment all day, and now, sitting here listening to his friends vent, he felt the contrast like a punch. Marcus leaned forward, his tone serious. You ever think maybe we're the problem? Like, maybe we expect too much? Ryan shook his head. Nope. I expect honesty and a little loyalty. That's not too much. Carl finally spoke, his voice calm. It's not about expectations. It's about risk. You can do everything right and still lose. Jake grinned. Here we go. Braxton's TED Talk, round 2. Carl smirked. I'm just saying marriage is a gamble, and the odds aren't great. Ryan raised his beer. Amen. Marcus frowned. But if you never take the gamble, what's the point? You just coast through life alone. Carl hesitated, Emily's face flashing in his mind again. He wanted to say yes, to stick to his logic, but the words felt heavier tonight. Maybe, he said finally. Or maybe you wait until the gamble feels worth it. The table went quiet for a beat. Then Jake broke the tension with a grin. All right, philosopher. Your turn. Carl tossed in his chips, forcing a smile, but his thoughts were miles away. For the first time in years, he wasn't sure if his parachute analogy still held. Because if Emily was the jump, maybe he'd take it. Chapter 9. Holiday Chaos and Unexpected Chemistry. Christmas Eve at Linda Braxton's house was a full-contact sport. Carl had barely walked through the door before his mother shoved a tray of cookies into his hands and barked orders like a drill sergeant in a festive sweater. Carl, take these to the living room. Carman, stop texting and help me with the punch. And someone, anyone, find the good napkins. Carl obeyed, weaving through a minefield of relatives he barely recognized. Cousins, aunts, and one guy who claimed to be family adjacent, but looked suspiciously like someone who wandered in for free food. The living room buzzed with chatter, laughter, and the faint sound of Bing Crosby crooning from the stereo. He set the cookies down and scanned the room for Carman. She was perched on the arm of a chair, phone in hand, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. Carl smirked and made his way over. Having fun? He asked. Define fun, Carman muttered, scrolling. I just got a text from Mom asking if I could look more festive. What does that even mean? Carl chuckled. Probably wear antlers. Kill me now, she said, then glanced up. You going to that party tonight? Carl blinked. What party? O'Malley's, she said. Emily invited you, right? Carl felt his pulse skip. Yeah, she did. Carman grinned. You should go. You look like you need a break from this. She gestured to the chaos around them. Carl didn't argue. By 8 o'clock, he was slipping out the door with a quick goodbye, ignoring his mother's dramatic gasp of, "You're leaving already?" He promised he'd be back before midnight, though he wasn't sure he meant it. O'Malley's was packed, the air thick with laughter and the smell of spiced cider. Carl pushed through the crowd, scanning for a familiar face, and then he saw her. Emily stood near the bar, wearing a deep green sweater that made her eyes look like Christmas lights. She was laughing at something a friend said, her head tilted just enough to make Carl forget how to breathe for a second. He walked over, trying to look casual. So, is this where all the cool kids hang out? Emily turned, her smile lighting up the room. Carl Braxton, you made it. Wouldn't miss it, he said, leaning against the bar. Though I had to fight my way through a mob of carolers to get here. Emily laughed. Sounds dangerous. Almost lost a limb, Carl said solemnly. But I figured it was worth the risk. Her eyes sparkled. Risk? That's a big word for you. Carl raised an eyebrow. You've been talking to Carman, haven't you? Maybe, Emily said, grinning. She mentioned you have strong opinions about marriage. Carl smirked. I plead the fifth. Emily leaned closer, her voice teasing. Come on, give me the short version. Carl hesitated, then shrugged. Marriage is like jumping out of an airplane with a parachute that only works half the time. Emily laughed so hard she nearly spilled her drink. That's dramatic. Accurate, Carl said, grinning. But hey, I'm open to debate. Emily tilted her head, her smile softening. Maybe it's not about the odds. Maybe it's about who you're jumping with. Carl stared at her, the noise of the bar fading into a hum. For a moment, he forgot every argument, every statistic, every reason he'd built his walls. Because Emily wasn't a risk, she was a possibility. And for the first time in years, Carl wondered if he was ready to take the leap. Chapter 10. Carl's Dilemma. Carl woke up Christmas morning to the sound of Carman humming in the kitchen. Off-key, as usual. He rolled out of bed, pulled on a sweater, and wandered downstairs, still replaying last night in his head. Emily's laugh. Her words. Maybe it's not about the odds. Maybe it's about who you're jumping with. He'd barely slept. Every argument he'd made about marriage, every analogy, every statistic. It all felt flimsy now, like paper shields against something bigger. He wasn't ready to admit it out loud, but the truth was creeping in. Emily wasn't just a possibility. She was a temptation. Carman looked up as he entered, her hair pulled into a messy bun, a mug of coffee in hand. Morning, Mr. Party Animal. Carl smirked. Morning, Miss Dating Disaster. She groaned. Don't remind me. He grabbed a mug and poured himself coffee, leaning against the counter. So, you survived Mom's Christmas Eve chaos? Barely, Carman said, sipping her drink. She tried to make me wear antlers. Carl chuckled. Sounds about right. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the smell of cinnamon and coffee filling the air. Then Carman set her mug down and gave him a look, the kind that said she was about to dig deeper. So, she said casually, how was the party? Carl hesitated. It was good. Good. Carman raised an eyebrow. That's all you've got? Carl sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Emily was there. Carman's grin spread like wildfire. Emily Carter? Yeah, Carl said, trying to sound nonchalant. We talked. And, Carman leaned forward, eyes sparkling. Don't you dare give me the short version. Carl chuckled, shaking his head. She's different. Still funny, still sharp. But, I don't know. Felt easy. Like no time had passed. Carmen's smile softened. You like her? Carl didn't answer right away. He stared into his coffee, the steam curling like question marks. I don't know what I feel. I've spent years telling myself marriage is a gamble, that it's not worth the risk. And now you're wondering if the right person makes the risk worth it, Carmen finished gently. Carl looked at her, surprised. Yeah. Carmen reached over and squeezed his hand. Carl, you're not wrong about the risks, but you can't live your whole life avoiding them. Love isn't about guarantees. It's about choosing someone who makes the gamble feel less scary. Carl swallowed hard, her words hitting deeper than he expected. What if I'm wrong? What if I jump and the parachute fails? Carmen smiled. Then you pick someone who's willing to jump with you. And maybe you learn how to land together. Carl stared at her, the weight of her words settling in. For years, he'd built walls to keep out pain, but maybe those walls were keeping out something else, something worth having. Before he could respond, Linda's voice rang out from the living room like a battle cry. Carmen, presents. Carmen grinned, grabbing her mug. Come on, philosopher. Time to face the chaos. Carl followed her, but his mind wasn't on presents. It was on Emily, and the question he couldn't shake. Maybe it was time to stop calculating the odds and start playing the game. Chapter 11. The turning point. The snow had started falling in lazy spirals by the time Carl stepped out of his mom's house. Christmas Day had been its usual circus. Presents, laughter, and Linda insisting everyone take just one more picture, until Carl considered faking a phone call to escape. But now, the night was calm. The streets hushed under a blanket of white. Emily had texted him earlier. Coffee? If you're not buried under wrapping paper. Carl didn't even hesitate. 10 minutes later, he was pulling into the small cafe on Main Street, the one that smelled like cinnamon and nostalgia. She was already there, sitting by the window, her green scarf draped loosely around her neck. When she looked up and smiled, Carl felt something in his chest shift, like a lock turning. Hey, he said, brushing snow from his jacket as he slid into the seat across from her. Hey, Emily replied, her voice warm against the winter chill. Survived the family chaos? Barely, Carl said, grinning. I think my mom tried to stage a photo shoot for a holiday card that doesn't exist. Emily laughed, and the sound was soft, easy, like music that didn't demand attention but stayed with you anyway. Carl ordered coffee, and for a moment, they just sat there, watching snowflakes tap against the glass. So, Emily said, stirring her drink, you still think marriage is a parachute with a 50-50 chance? Carl smirked. You don't let things go, do you? Not when they're interesting, she said, her eyes glinting. I've been thinking about that analogy. Oh, Carl leaned in, curious. And, Emily tilted her head, her smile playful. Maybe it's not about the parachute. Maybe it's about trusting the person you're jumping with. Carl stared at her, the words sinking deeper than he expected. That's a good point. Don't sound so surprised, she teased. I'm not, Carl said quietly. I've spent so long thinking about the risk that I forgot about the reason people take it. Emily's expression softened. Fear makes sense, but so does hope. Carl swallowed hard, his fingers curling around his mug. What if hope isn't enough? Emily held his gaze, steady and calm. Then you pick someone who makes the fall worth it. The cafe seemed to fade. The chatter, the clinking cups, even the snow outside. It was just her, sitting across from him, saying words that cracked something open inside him. Carl exhaled slowly. You make it sound easy. Emily smiled. It's not, but maybe that's what makes it worth trying. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, the silence thick with something unspoken. Carl felt the weight of every argument he'd made, every wall he'd built, and realized none of it mattered right now. Because Emily wasn't a statistic. She wasn't a gamble. She was a choice. And for the first time in years, Carl wanted to choose. Chapter 12. All in, Carl stood outside Emily's apartment building, snow crunching under his boots, his breath fogging in the cold. He'd texted her an hour ago, want to join us for Christmas dinner? And spent the next 60 minutes wondering if he'd lost his mind. Inviting someone into Braxton family chaos was like throwing them into a shark tank with a smile. Her reply had been simple, sure. What time? And now, here he was, waiting as the door opened and Emily stepped out, bundled in a navy coat, her cheeks pink from the chill. You're brave, Carl said, grinning as he held the car door open. Most people would have run after I mentioned my mom's obsession with holiday photos. Emily laughed, sliding in. I like a challenge. Carl shook his head, smiling as he climbed in. You say that now. Linda Braxton's house was a battlefield of wrapping paper and half-eaten cookies when they arrived. Carl barely had time to hang up his coat before his mother appeared, eyes wide, smile even wider. Carl, Linda exclaimed, then froze as she spotted Emily. Oh, hello. Carl cleared his throat. Mom, this is Emily. Emily, this is the general. Linda laughed, flustered but delighted. Welcome, Come in, come in. Carman. Carl brought a guest. Carman appeared from the kitchen, her grin spreading like wildfire. Emily Carter? Hi. Emily smiled warmly. Hi, it's been a while. Oh, this is amazing, Carman said, shooting Carl a look that screamed we're talking later. Come sit. Mom. Get her some cider. Carl groaned inwardly as Linda launched into hostess mode, fussing over Emily like she'd just won a prize. He caught Emily's eye, and she gave him a reassuring smile, the kind that said she could handle the circus. Dinner was chaos. Linda insisted on taking just one more picture every 10 minutes. Carman kept dropping hints about Carl's high school crush. Thanks, sis. And Uncle Dave told a story about his gallbladder surgery that no one asked for. Through it all, Emily was a champ, laughing, chatting, even helping Linda pass the mashed potatoes like she'd been part of the family for years. At one point, Carl leaned over and whispered, "Still think you like challenges?" Emily smirked. "This is nothing. I survived a company holiday party with karaoke." Carl chuckled, feeling something warm settle in his chest. She wasn't just handling the chaos, she was making it better. For the first time in years, Christmas didn't feel like a balancing act. It felt good. After dinner, when the house finally quieted and Linda retreated to her photo albums, Carl and Emily slipped out to the porch. Snowflakes drifted lazily under the porch light, and the night was still except for the distant hum of carols. "Thanks for coming," Carl said softly. "I know this was a lot." Emily smiled, her breath fogging in the cold. "It was fun. Your family's lively." "That's one word for it," Carl said, grinning. Then his smile faded, replaced by something heavier. "Emily, I've spent years avoiding this. Relationships, risk, all of it." She looked at him, her expression calm, patient. "And now," Carl exhaled slowly, the words catching in his throat. "Now I'm wondering if I've been wrong." Emily stepped closer, her voice gentle. "Maybe it's not about being wrong. Maybe it's about being ready." Carl met her gaze, the snow swirling around them like confetti. For once, he didn't think about odds or parachutes or statistics. He thought about her, standing here smiling at him like he was worth the risk. And for the first time in years, Carl decided to take the leap. Chapter 13. A new game. Carl Braxton had never been a fan of endings. They always felt too neat, too final. But as he sat at Jake's poker table a week after Christmas, surrounded by laughter, empty beer bottles, and the smell of pepperoni pizza, he realized some endings were just new beginnings in disguise. "All right, gentlemen," Jake announced, shuffling the deck with his usual flair. "And lady," he added, nodding toward Emily, who sat between Carl and Marcus, grinning like she'd been part of the crew forever. "Buy-in's $5. Winner gets bragging rights and the last slice." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Bragging rights? That's it." Jake smirked. "And eternal glory." Carl chuckled, tossing his chips into the pot. "Careful, Emily. He takes eternal glory very seriously." She shot him a playful look. "Good thing I'm competitive." Carl grinned, feeling that now familiar warmth settle in his chest. A week ago, he'd been the guy with the parachute analogy, the guy who swore off risk like it was poison. Now, he was sitting next to a woman who made risk feel like possibility, and laughing with friends who reminded him that life wasn't meant to be played safe. The cards were dealt, the jokes flew, and for the first time in years, Carl felt light. Not because everything was perfect, life was still messy, unpredictable, but because he'd stopped trying to control the odds. He decided to play the game, knowing the outcome wasn't guaranteed. Emily leaned closer, her voice low enough for only him to hear. "So, Mr. Risk Management, still think marriage is a coin toss?" Carl smirked, his eyes meeting hers. "Maybe, but if you're in the game, I like my chances." Her smile was soft, steady, the kind that made Carl believe in things he'd spent years avoiding. And as Jake cracked another joke and Ryan groaned about losing his chips, Carl realized something simple, something true. Sometimes, the best bets aren't about winning. They're about playing with the right person.